Okay, so now we're going to look at chemistry. And the first question in the acid and base unit is, what are properties of acids and bases? Well, every acid and every base is an electrolyte in an aqueous solution. That means that acids react with metals to release hydrogen gas, and an acid is an element with a hydrogen ion, and a base contains an OH or hydroxide ion. So there are a bunch of these ions floating around. Here's what it looks like. So an acid always has that H plus next to it, like here in HCl. And a base always has the hydroxide, the OH next to it, like in this molecule NaOH. How do acids and bases generate electricity? Well, an acid plus a base equals salt and water. When you dissolve an ionic compound in a solution, it breaks apart into ions. These ionic compounds, or salt, make it possible to generate electricity. So in a question, you really want to emphasize that it's the salt or the ions making electricity. Here's another image. So when you have mostly ions or the salt, you're going to have a very bright bulb because it's conducting a lot of electricity. However, you have mostly molecules, so see how they're not dissociated? They don't have pluses or minuses. You're going to have a very dim bulb because there aren't a lot of ions. Next question. What happens when an acid and base react? What is produced? Well, really important, this is always asked, an acid donates or gives a hydrogen ion to a solution, while a base accepts or takes a hydrogen ion from the solution. So acids donate and bases accept. So you could remember it in the acronym ADBA, so ADBA. Here's a visual image. So here the acid is donating to a base, and the base is accepting that hydrogen ion. And in return, see how we had HCl and H2O? Well, now this H2O became H3O, and we're left with a chloride ion. The third question is, what do acids and bases do in chemical reactions? Well, an acid is a substance that gives up a hydrogen ion to another substance. Water can act as an acid since it sometimes gives up a hydrogen. So again, anything is an acid if it gives up or donates a hydrogen ion to another substance. A base is a substance that accepts a hydrogen ion from another. Acids react with the base to form water and the conjugate base. So going back to this, if this HCl is the acid, well, the hydronium ion is a conjugate base. If this is the base, H2O, then the chloride ion is a conjugate acid. So they just change names. Next, what makes something a strong acid or base? A strong base easily releases hydroxide ions. A strong acid or base completely dissociates when dissolved in water, while as a weak acid or base partially dissociates in water. An example of a strong acid is hydrochloric acid because it completely dissociates. And you know it's an acid because it has the H in it, the hydrogen ion. And an example of a weak acid is acetic acid because it partially dissociates. An example of a strong base is NaOH because it completely dissociates. And you can guess it, an example of a weak base is NH3 because it partially dissociates. So here's my example. So HCl is a strong base, a strong acid. It's completely separated from each other in this aqueous solution, whereas NaOH is not as strong. So you can see how some of them are connected to each other, whereas some are not. So not everything has dissociated completely. And then wrapping up, what is the pH scale and what is considered basic and acidic? Well, the pH scale measures the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. The scale runs from 0 to 14, and that means an acid has a pH of 0 to 7, with 0 being the strongest acid and 7 being the weakest acid. A base has a pH of 7 to 14, with 14 being the strongest and 7 being the weakest. Here's a quick example. How do you find the hydronium or hydroxide concentration? Well, when the concentration of hydronium ions increases, and let's look at the graph here. So it's 10 to the negative 1, 10 to the negative 2. The concentration of hydroxide ion decreases. So 10 to the negative 13, 10 to the negative 12. So just remember this relationship. You can calculate pH by using these formulas. Negative log of H3O plus, or pH plus POH equals 14. So look up here, pH is 1, the POH would be 13. So just keep these in mind as we start reviewing.